Hi, I am Zahra Ahmad, or for those of you who do not speak Arabic, Zahra Ahmad. I'm an Iraqi-born American, and today I am here to tell you about, or at least remind you of, your heroism. I think the best way of getting this message across is probably going to be through storytelling. After all, I am a journalist, and I did promise Matt that I was going to be up here for 12 minutes, so... the best way of getting to know me is getting to know, or at least understanding, who and where I'm from. So right here we have my baba, or dad, and my mama. They grew up about a quarter of a mile apart from each other in the Iraqi city of Mindili. Mindili bordered the Iran, it bordered Iran, and I don't know if you guys are super aware of this, but there was a war that went on between Iran and Iraq. So as teenagers, my parents watched Iraqi soldiers march past them and into the country that would eventually push them out of their homes. When they were pushed out of their homes, they were a bit separated for a while, and then they reunited nearly a decade later in Sulaymaniyah. Sulaymaniyah is in Kurdistan. Kurdistan is a portion of Iraq. And I'm going to try to keep it super simple, but they basically different governance, but they're getting along somehow. There's been some conflict, but they're managing, right? My dad was actually hiding in Sulaymaniyah, and he was hiding in Sulaymaniyah because he made some pretty risky political decisions as a young man. So he grew up in southeast Iraq, and he was studying economics at the University of Baghdad at the time. Saddam Hussein had just entered his second term of dictatorship, and for the younger ones, Saddam Hussein is the bad guy in this story to my dad. So my dad decided that he wanted to drop economics and start revolting against Saddam Hussein, and so he started overturning cities, and he felt pretty invincible at the time because the political party that he was affiliated with was backed by the United States. And when you have the leading nation on your side, why wouldn't you feel invincible? But the problem is Saddam Hussein's hands reached much farther than my dad could imagine, and eventually a warrant was out for his arrest. Now, in Iraq, at that time, if you're revolting against the government, a warrant for your arrest was basically a warrant for your death. So my dad hid in Sulaymaniyah, and while he was there, he said, well, I kind of want to get married. I might as well. I know there's war going on, but let's start a family. Why not? So he reached out to an old friend, someone that he had grown up with. That person just so happened to be my mom, Lemiat's brother. So her brother said, hey, I have a sister. She's single. You guys are around the same age. You want to meet? They met, and they fell in love, and eventually they had me in 1995. Wonderful, right? Well, the problem is that there was still a lot of turmoil going on. Iraq was in the Persian War. There was a lot of political tension in Kurdistan itself. So the area that we were kind of seeking asylum was under turmoil itself. And eventually we had to make the decision to flee. We were hiding in some mountains, and my mom was pregnant with my sister, who my dad is holding in that picture at the time. And when we were hiding in the mountains, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like super rough. It was like nice cottages by the lake. But my mom was 8 months pregnant. Eventually, she had to give birth, and so she had to trek through Iran, have my sister, come back. And then we eventually decided, all right, things have settled down. Let's go back to Sulaymaniyah. It'll be chill. Well, it wasn't so chill. In fact, it wasn't chill at all. And we got a letter in the mail from the Kurdistan government that said, hey, I know we've been protecting you for a while, but we know that there's a warrant out for your arrest, and we don't want Saddam Hussein favoring one party over the other since we both want power, so you have to leave in 48 hours. So my dad, being the strong person that he is, gathered us up, took us over to Iran. We hid in Iran for a while, went to Turkey, landed ourselves in Syria, and through his political connections, we sought asylum to the United States and were eventually granted that asylum. That's how I got here in Michigan. I know, it's a whirlwind. All right, so I grew up in Lansing, Michigan with my family, and I like to explain this picture tells a little bit of a story. So this picture was taken weeks after 9/11, and that's kind of when everything in my life changed, and I didn't even realize it at the time, you know? I was little, and I was more of an observer than anything else when I was a kid. All I did was watch, and the compliment and kind of comment that they always gave my parents at parent-teacher conferences was, she's really quiet, and that's because I was observing. It was a really weird time. People were always giving us looks because my mom wore a hijab, she covered up. My dad was trying to teach us Arabic and, you know, keep our culture within us. And at all the same time, I was wondering, well, I don't really understand what makes me so different. And why am I so much hairier than all the other kids? And why do they look at mom and call her a terrorist? And what's a bomb? right? I didn't totally understand, so I was observing. Now, when I got into my teenage years, that observing became a little more abstract, and flight or flight kind of took in, and I decided the only way I could survive and be successful in the United States and give back to my family and make sure I can make them proud is by assimilating. And what that means is I basically just tried to fit in. And so I didn't wear the headscarf for my own personal reasons. I wanted to go to prom. I wanted to stay out. I wanted to do what all teenagers wanted to do. And that was so hard for my parents because they came from Iraq. And in Iraq, there was so much war and turmoil, and there were certain customs that they were following, and they felt like they were losing us to America, essentially. And that created a little bit of a drift in my family, unfortunately. Now, I was still pretty much, I was still young at the time, and I decided my parents just don't understand me. Forget that culture. I'm an American. I want to be treated as an American. I want to do American things. Let me pursue that. And my parents fought it for a while, and then eventually, when I got to university, I turned 18, and they were like, we can't fight it anymore. Girl, go do it. Go do it. Go do whatever you want. Make your own decisions. Well, I did just that. And I have to admit, I made some pretty risky decisions in college. In fact, I made a lot of mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes in college, but they were all learning points. And I started to understand what my parents were trying to teach me all along. They were trying to teach me more than this is how you should dress and this is what you should eat and this is how you should act. They were trying to incorporate certain values that they used to survive all their lives, right? They've gone through so many wars. They went through 3 wars, and they're both under 55. And those values were honesty, empathy, understanding, forgiveness, love, and resilience. And when I got to about 21, I didn't really recognize who I was anymore. I was living this life, and I was making all these decisions, and I had all this freedom, but I couldn't really understand if these were the best decisions. And I often found myself really sad and alone. And still, even though I morphed into this American, why did I feel so lonely? Why was I still unable to connect to all these people? So I looked to the people that know me the best, the only people I was ever really comfortable with. Those were my parents. And as I asked them more questions, the more I learned about them, the more I saw myself in them. And the more I incorporated those values that they taught me my entire life, the better I was as a person. And so I'm going to go through this super fast, but bear with me. I decided to go back to the country where I was from. I decided to go back to Iraq and reunite with my dad's side of the family. My mom's side was here in Lansing. I got to know them. It was time to move on and see people that I knew and see a family and meet a family that I'd known about my whole life but didn't get to meet. So, as usual, I decided the best way to survive in a foreign country was to adapt to what was normal, right? My mom taught me how to wear a headscarf. I said my goodbyes to my family, my number ones, my siblings, my parents. And me and my best friend Bronte started traveling. We found ourselves on top of a mountain where I saw the remnants of the Iran-Iraq war. There's an observatory up there, and it was blown away and forced the scientists, just like it forced my parents, to flee what they loved. That's the outcome of war. We also went to Turkey, and in Turkey, that's when I really started to see people that looked like me. So unless you're a person of color or a minority, sometimes you can be the only person that looks like you in the room, and oftentimes it's pretty uncomfortable, right? When I was in Turkey, everybody looked like me. It was dope to a certain extent, but every time I met someone, they'd still ask me, well, what are you? I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? How can you tell I'm not one of you? I look just like you. But even then, you could realize, the sense of tribalism is even if you were in a room of people that had dark features just like you, there's still a sense of tribalism there, which was really interesting to see and learn. More great pictures. Some of the things that I thought about Turkey were true, like all of the mosques and the architecture. That was dope. And eventually I made my way into Iraq. All right, so the first thing that I noticed about Iraq is that there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. For instance, I met my mom's extended family here. I call him my cousin uncle, and I think he's like my mom's mom or my grandmother's cousin, so cousin uncle. Anytime you go into a home into Iraq, they're going to feast. They always provide a huge feast. That's what I was used to growing up. Dads will always laugh at their jokes, and their kids will always be on their phones. Selfies, Still a major thing. Dads still don't smile in selfies. They're very serious. And of course, 3-year-olds will always ask for your passcodes and if there are games on your phone, no matter where you are. Oh, and guys, yes, they do rock that haircut everywhere. No one is immune to that style. My grandma does a duck face when I tell her to do a picture. And of course, this is my dad's side of the family. There, I was really able to see all of my different cousins, aunts, and uncles. And I think the most important thing out of it all is I really understood the resilience of Iraqis, and especially Iraqi women. And I don't think that they get praised enough for that. So all of the women that I'd met, including my aunts and my cousins, were either studying to be doctors, were orthopedic or orthodontists, surgical assistants, or professors. And I thought that was so cool. In fact, I have one aunt that is 46, no children, and doesn't mind it. Those stereotypes that I had grown up thinking about my own culture were just completely abolished on this trip. So as I returned, I started to wonder, well, I'm walking away with this wonderful experience. I truly do feel comfortable being myself, and I understand that I feel comfortable being myself when I am only surrounded by love, people who accept me and are understanding. So I came back with all these goodies and all these stories, and I thought, you know what? I've gone through so many different things in my life, so many low points that I haven't touched on, but I've been able to survive, and I'm so proud of that. And this trip has meant the world to me. Like, I'm on my biggest high. But here's the thing about life. Even when you are on your biggest high, it can come back down and knock you into your newest low. About a month after my trip, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 mesothelioma. It's lung cancer that you get through asbestos contact. So that was a really new low for me. This whole time in my life, I'd faced adversity in the form of things that had happened to me and how I was going to be coping with them, right? And how I could face them and overcome them, and no obstacle is too great. But when my dad's life has been threatened, so stage 4 mesothelioma, it's incurable, and right now we're on a trial of treatment. The chemo stopped working. I have felt my lowest lows in the last month, and I felt like I wasn't able to relate. And I kept wondering, I went on this trip, I did what I was supposed to do, why can't I catch a break? But here's the thing. The point of life is to not catch a break and to go through it easy. The point of life is to understand that you have ancestors, great ancestors, and parents and grandparents, and people that have withstood all of this time and faced and overcome adversity so that you could be here. That part of your heroism, that resilience, you inherited immediately. And so, instead of looking at the world and saying, well, why is this happening to me? I instead look at the world and try to figure out how can I overcome this obstacle. I've come to really cherish what matters the most in this world, and it's not about fitting in, but it's being around people who make you feel like you don't need to fit in, like who you are and how you are is good enough for them. And so that was my trip, and that is my story. I don't have super great wisdom to give besides that you have resilience within you, and that is why you're here. The resilience can be traced back to all of your ancestors. And so when you do face adversity and you hit that new low that life is guaranteed to give you, remember that.